A Confucian scholar with frosted temples and a young man in green shirt left the township school and came to the downstairs of the memorial archway. The most learned teacher in the town, with a haggard face, stretched out his hand and pointed to a plaque on his head. Do not give in. What's the meaning of the 4 words? Zhao Yao, a young man who is both a disciple of a school and a schoolboy, looked up and said without hesitation, "Our Confucianism teaches with the word benevolence. The 4 words on the plaque are taken from when benevolence. Don't let teachers, which means that we scholars should respect teachers, but we don't have to be humble before benevolence, righteousness and morality." Mr. Dodge asked, "Don't be humble. What if it's changed to knowing?" The young man in green shirt has a clear and elegant appearance, and his temperament is more gentle and restrained than that of Song Jigson. He is like a fledgling hibiscus, naturally lovely. When the gentleman asked this mysterious question, the young man did not dare to take it lightly and consider it carefully. He felt that the gentleman was studying his knowledge. How dare he be free? The middle-aged Confucian scholar looked at the disciple's rigid appearance facing the great enemy, smiled knowingly, and patted the young man on the shoulder. "It's just a casual question. Don't be nervous. It seems that I detained your nature too much before. It's too complicated to carve. It makes you live like a statue placed in Wenchang Pavilion. You have a straight face, obey rules everywhere, reason everything, and you're not tired. But at present, it's a good thing." The young man was puzzled, but his husband had taken him to the other side and still looked up at the 4-character plaque. The Confucian scholar looked relaxed. For some reason, the unsmiling teacher actually talked about many interesting cases, told the disciples. In the past, the person who wrote this plaque was the first person to write calligraphy in the world. It has caused a lot of controversy, such as the debate over the structure and divine meaning, and the debate over the praise and criticism of ancient quality and today Yan, rhyme, method, meaning. Posture and calligraphy have been the 4 meanings of calligraphy for thousands of years. This person has won the double ladder, which simply doesn't give his peers half a way to survive. As for this time, if you take a closer look, you should be able to find that although the 4 characters are similar in pen, structure and divine meaning, in fact, they were written separately by 4 immortal Taoist ancestors. At that time, 2 older mortals also wrote letters and had a good quarrel. They all wanted to write the mysterious word "Qi." "I don't want to write vulgar words." Then the Confucian scholar led the young man around to the "Don't Ask" outside. He looked left and right with a faint sigh. "The township school you were studying in will soon be closed down by several big families because there is no teacher. Where it will be completely demolished. It will be built into a small Taoist temple or set up a Buddha statue for pilgrims to burn incense. A Taoist or monk will preside over it year after year until the Jian deadline. During this period, it may be replaced 2 or 3 times to avoid the confusion of the people in the town. In fact, it is just crude. It's just a cover-up. It's just that if you complete a sesame-sized magic here, if you put it outside, it may be equivalent to the magnificent momentum of the god beating the drum and the spring thunder shaking the world. In the back, the voice of the teacher was as thin as a mosquito and fly. Even if reading Lang Zhaoyu pricked up his ears, he couldn't hear clearly. Mr. Dodge sighed and said in a helpless and tired tone, "Many things, originally the secret of heaven, cannot be revealed. Now, it doesn't matter more and more. But after all, we're scholars, so we still need to talk about our faces. What's more, if I Che Jinchen takes the lead in breaking the rules, it's tantamount to stealing from ourselves. The appearance of eating is really ugly." Zhao Yao suddenly summoned up his courage and said, "Say, the students know you are not a layman, and this town is not an ordinary place." The Confucian scholar smiled curiously. "Oh, tell me about it." Zhao Yao pointed to the majestic 12-foot memorial archway. This place, together with the iron log well in Xianxia Lane, as well as the corridor bridge with 2 iron swords hanging at the bottom of the bridge, the old locust tree, the peach tree in Taoai Lane, and the Fulu Street where my Zhao family is located. The Guyu Post and Changyan Post posted every year are very strange. The Confucian interrupted the young man. "Strange? How strange?" You've never been out since you grew up here. Have you seen the scenery outside the town? Why do you say that without comparison? Zhao Yu said in a low voice. I'm familiar with the contents of those books. Saying, the peach blossom in Taoai Lane is very different from the description of the poem in the book. In addition, why do you teach only 3 elementary books, focusing on literacy? What book should we read after elementary school? What's the purpose of reading? What's the karma in the book? What's the meaning of being Tia Shirang in the morning and ascending the emperor's hall in the evening? What's the meaning of the emperor attaches great importance to heroes and literature Zhang Zhaokang to kill superintendents successively? Although they never talked about the imperial court, the capital, and the world karma, the Confucian scholar smiled happily and said, yes, it's useless to say more. Zhao Yi stopped talking immediately. The Confucian scholar who called himself Che Jingchen whispered, Zhao Yao, in the future, you need to be careful in your words and deeds. Remember that misfortune comes from your mouth. Therefore, most Confucian sages keep their mouths shut. The gentleman above the sages is cautious in being alone and bow like a jade, lest there be any defect. As for the saints, such as the mountain owners of 72 academies, these people can make prophecies and follow the law like the great Taoist immortal and the golden arhat of Buddhism. This group of people are different from all others after reaching this state. The experts in Sai Bai's family are generally referred to as land immortals, which can be regarded as stepping into the threshold with 1 foot. However, these characters are like dragons. Some are high above the earth, like the statues of gods in Taoist temples. They are unattainable. Some gods and dragons see the head, but not the tail, and ordinary people can't find them at all. Zhao Yu listened vaguely, like falling clouds. Zhao Yu couldn't help asking, Sir, why did you say this today? The Confucian scholar's face is open-minded, laughing. You have a husband. So do I. And my husband. Anyway, I thought I could survive for decades. Suddenly, I found that some people behind the scenes were unwilling to wait for this time. So I can't take you out of the town this time. You need to go out by yourself. Some harmless truth should be revealed to you. You should just listen to adjust the story. I just hope you understand that there are days outside the sky and people in the world that no matter how lucky you are, you can't be complacent and slack. The decline of well water and the separation of locust leaves from branches and hulomans. The scholar named Che Jingchen reminded, Zhao Yu, do you remember the locust leaf I asked you to collect? The young scholar nodded vigorously. Put it together with the seal given by your husband. When leaves leave the branches, how can they be so green, fresh, and delicate? There are thousands of people in the town. There are only a handful of people who get this blessing shadow. You can often play with that locust leaf. Maybe there will be a chance in the future. The Confucian scholar's eyes are deep. In addition, over the years, I have asked you to do good deeds and make good friends in the town. No matter who you treat, you should treat each other with courtesy and sincerity. Later, you will gradually understand the mystery. The benefits of those seemingly insignificant trivial things are not worse than holding a local county chronicle. The boy found a yellow bird resting on a stone beam, occasionally jumping and chirping. The Confucian scholar looked up at the yellow bird with a dignified expression. The boy didn't see anything different. Confucian scholar Che Jingchen suddenly looked at the side of the mud bottle lane and frowned more and more. The Confucian gently sighed. The stinging insects gradually smelled the spring sand and break through the earth. The wettest guests, sneaking under the eyes of the host. Is it too big to do that trick? Do you really think you can do whatever you want here by relying on a small half bowl of water? Zhao Yu was worried. The Confucian waved his hand, indicating that it had nothing to do with the boy. That took him to the list plaque. It was as if Zhao Yao, a young man, suddenly heard the sting of a spring thunder. He suddenly stopped and stared blankly. Not far away, there was a girl in black with a veiled head. Her face was covered with gauze. She was symmetrical, neither slender nor plump. She had a long sword with a snow-white scabbard and a narrow knife with a green scabbard around her waist. Standing under the plague of angry bullfighting, she put her arms around her chest and raised her head. The Confucian felt funny and coughed gently. The young man was just numb and didn't understand the reminder of "don't look at me if I'm not polite" with a knowing smile. The Confucian scholar didn't shout and scold. Instead, he stopped coughing and let the boy beside him look at the girl. The girl seems to have never noticed the sight of the boy. She seems to be on the verge of violence. I'm afraid the girl didn't realize that the light around her circle was distorted. The scholar is the most reasonable person in the end. He advised with understanding. "You'd better not compare with me for the time being," which may hinder your martial arts state of mind. That it's very important to climb to the top of martial arts step by step. He looked a little strange at this time. He held the tip of the sword in one hand and the body of the sword in the other hand. He suddenly smiled and imitated the tone of the girl. Old age said, "Listen or not, it's your freedom. Whether you say it or not is my business." The girl was silent for a moment and said in a low voice, "Be taught." The Confucian smiled and nodded that he was not an arrogant woman who was arrogant and domineering. That was good. He gently threw the knife to the girl and said, "Give it back to you first." He looked down at the long sword with the tip of his finger and trembled slightly. The young phoenix is clear in the sound of the old phoenix. The Confucian regretted. The texture of this sword is quite good, but there is still a gap from the top. As a result, it can only carry the weight of 2 words at most, which is a little reluctantly. Otherwise, with your qualifications, take away your 4 words and 3 words, which must be more than enough. Double quotes when he sighed. He raised his hand and drank softly. Gee, 2 dazzling lights flied from the plaque of angry bullfighting. The Confucian scholar waved his sleeve and clapped it twice in a row, and the words clapped into the long sword. On the plaque, the words Jian and Niu still have momentum. The words rush and fight seem to be an old man in the twilight on the sickbed. After the reflection, he finally lost his essence and spirit. The Confucian scholar shook his wrist carelessly, and the long sword returned to the scabbard of his master in the blink of an eye. Because it had been put back in the scabbard, no one knew for the time being. There were 2 breaths on the sword, which swam like a dragon. The next scene shocked Xianxia, who had gone through many vicissitudes. The girl slowly took off the scabbard, threw it at random, and nailed it obliquely into the lowest ground. After the fail with the hanging hat, her eyes were firm. "This is not the candle I pursue." The Confucian glanced at the sword abandoned by the girl, and felt a long-lost heaviness in his heart. He had to ask the question of losing his identity. "Do you know who I am?" The girl nodded and shook her head. "I heard that a saint of the 3 religions would come here every GSE time to preside over the operation of a large array. It has been dozens of years. From time to time, someone came out of here, either with a strange treasure or made rapid progress in cultivation. So I wanted to see it. When I saw you, I determined your identity. Otherwise, I wouldn't be so straightforward when." Xianxia asked again, "Do you know what you gave up just now?" The girl was silent. In the scabbard of the sword on the ground, the long sword trembled like a beautiful woman moaning and pleading for her lover's change of heart. The young scholar had already turned his head secretly and looked carefully at the girl in the distance. The Confucianists know without profound knowledge. They're still puzzled about it. That it's always hard to force the long sword with great vitality into the girl. Finally, they have to remind the girl, "Girl, you'd better put away the sword. Next, the town will be very not peaceful. It's a good thing to have more things to defend themselves." The girl didn't speak, so she turned and left, still unwilling to take the sword. Xianxia was a little helpless. He waved his sleeve and nailed the sword into the height of a memorial archway stone pillar. If someone forcibly pulled it out, it would disturb himself in the center. Just like before, the storyteller did not escape the distant attention of the scholar. Personally take Zhao Yao all the way from the school to the Zhao family mansion on Fuli Street. The middle-aged Confucian scholar walks slowly. Whenever he takes a step, there will be some imperceptible streamers in some hidden places in the tall mansions with dense courtyards on both sides of the street. Xianxia whispered, "It's strange. Where's the little girl? Is it not the immortal sun outside this continent?" After he returned to the school, he sat in front of the table and placed a jade gui, about 1 foot and 2 inches long. The 4 corners were carved with the mountains of 4 tongues. which housed stability in the 4 directions. On the front was engraved with dense small seal inscriptions, no less than 100 words. According to the Confucian ritual system, there was only one emperor who could hold the town Ji. It can be seen that the town is of great significance. Turning it over, only a few words were engraved on the back of Yugui. The handwriting is rigorous and unique. The muscles and bones are very strong and the spirit is very long. On the bookcase, there is also a secret letter that has just arrived. The Confucian scholar with frosty white temples had red eyes. Say, the students are incompetent and can only watch you humiliated here. The Confucian scholar looked out of the window. He didn't have much sadness or joy, but he looked lonely. Che Jingchen is ashamed of his mentor and lives for 100 years. He only owes one death. When Song Jixen took something out of the inner room and put it on the table, Fu Nanhua could not hide the ecstasy on his face no matter how he covered it up. An inconspicuous small pot with the signature mandrill at the bottom. Song Jixen folded his hands on the table, leaned forward and asked with a smile, "How much is this pot worth?" The young leader of the old dragon city finally took back his sign from the small pot, looked up and said frankly, "It's not worth a silver or two to sell in the secular dynasty, but if I sell it, I can buy a city." Song Jixin asked, "Tens of thousands." Fu Nanhua stretched out 3 fingers. Song Jixin said, "It's 300,000. Fu Nanhua was stunned and laughed. He thought Song Jixin would say 30,000 people. On the other side of Xinhua Lane, a old man squatted beside the iron lock shaft and stared at the iron chain tied to the base of the wheel car. It's like struggling with how to move it. The girl with black clothes, hangings and hats and cold temperament walked around the town aimlessly. At this time, she only hung the green sheath narrow knife, and her hands were just scribbled with cloth strips. When she just walked into an unknown lane, whoosh, something breaks through the air, and then stops behind the girl. Buzzing, the girl frowned. Her head did not turn, and a word jumped out of her teeth. "Get out." Another swish. The flying sword with a long scabbard was so frightened that it really hid back in the scabbard. Proud girl, clever flying sword. The girl in black walks into the deep alley. Occasionally, people hang out festive red lanterns. Compared with others, the girl with hangings and hats has no elaborate bedding of the family, and there is no grass snake and grey lion lying dozens of miles. She is so alone and breaks into the town. Not far from the alley, there stood a young man in royal clothes, holding a green jade seal in his hands. It was the size of a child's palm. It was carved with dragons and tigers. It was shining under the sunlight. There were faint strands of glow in the jade seal. The young man in royal clothes looked up and squinted at the treasure in his hand, his face intoxicated. Beside him, a tall old man knelt on one knee and was carefully wiping the soil on the boy's boots with his cuffs. In fact, the young man in royal clothes found a strange girl Ellie. She wore a light curtain hat and a green sheath narrow knife. Her pace was steady. It was obvious that she would never be a native of the town. But the young man in royal clothes didn't care. He still looked carefully at the ancient jade seal that had been silent for thousands of years. Deep in his heart, he even hoped that the girl would have the idea of seizing a treasure. Otherwise it would be too boring. Anyway, he has succeeded in 2 things, and the harvest is far more than expected. If he doesn't find something to do, he can only leave with the old slave. But the young man, he will feel that there is something missing. Just like his home thousands of the miles away from town, he was wearing a golden 9-python robe. Unfortunately, he was always missing a claw. When you come to this town, each person you choose can carry 3 keepsakes and put them into a brocade bag before you hand over a bag to the gatekeeper. It belongs to the toll that must be taken out no matter who the gatekeeper is, no matter how dilapidated the city gate is. Even if a monarch or ancestor comes here, you have to follow this rule honestly. The other 2 brocade bags mean that you can get up to 2 treasures here and take them out of the town. Otherwise, you can find 10 or 100 treasures here and return them one by one. The keepsake in the bag is 3 kinds of copper coins with special shapes. They're the money used by the people in the market to celebrate the victory of Xianxia. The spring greeting money hung on the peach charm every year in the palace. and the support money held in the palm of the statue of the city god. It is said to be copper coins. In fact, it is a rare gold essence. To most ordinary people at the foot of the mountain, even official silver is no common. What's more, a bag of heavy gold is indeed enough to make people willing to sell heirlooms. The young man in royal clothes studied 3 kinds of copper coins that were not recorded in official history. But he couldn't figure out any way. In front, a girl with a cold breath walked straight ahead and regarded the alley master and servant as if they had nothing. The young man in royal clothes changed his mind temporarily, put away the jade seal, put it into a cloth bag that had been prepared long ago and hung it around his waist. But he still stood in the middle of the alley and didn't mean to make way. The tall, fair-skinned old man also stood up, with a soft voice and a thin voice. Your Highness, this man is a master of martial arts and should not be taken lightly. If he is outside the town, he doesn't have to care. But here, even our pure martial arts physique can withstand the oppression of the world all the time. Once we try our best to turn our breath and open our orifices and acupoints, it will be like a river pouring into the sea, and the meridians and orifices will flood it out of control. At that time, our family's death is small, and your Highness's safety is great. If your Highness's great cause of monasticism is made a little wrong due to a poor care, how can we explain to your Majesty and Empress when we go back? The young man in royal clothes said. Grandpa Wu, after you left the palace, you talked a lot. In the past, in the palace, you just turned around all year round. Those words are worse than the stupid parrot raised by my sister. The old man calls himself our family. He is civil everywhere, especially in the bottom of his heart. He can only be a loyal eunuch in the palace. Seeing that the little master didn't seem to understand what he said, he had to say more bluntly, Your Highness, this person in the alley is here, which may pose a threat to your Highness. The young man in royal clothes smiled lazily and said, Although I have long heard that there are 3 sects and 9 streams of fish and dragons mixed up on the road of cultivation, many crooked ways and more heretical ways, I just met her by chance. She will start to kill and seize treasure at the sight of money. It's unlikely. If everyone in the mountain was like this, wouldn't the world be in chaos long ago? The old man sighed. The dynasty at the foot of the mountain and the immortal family at the top of the mountain seemed to agree with each other. In fact, they were disgusted with each other. The young man in royal clothes was somewhat disheartened. Forget it. Forget it. Count this bad debt at a girl, not a big husband. The girl came up to him and pressed the handle of the knife with her left hand. The young man in royal guard smiled, turned sideways and motioned the girl to go first. The girl in black also slowed down slightly, turned slightly, and her eyes behind the curtain head were full of vigilance. When my eunuch found the girl's injured hands wrapped in cotton cloth, he couldn't help frowning. Presumptuous. Suddenly, the old man shouted angrily, like spring thunder on his tongue, and his feet seemed to slip. The tall figure came to the young man in royal clothes. The old man leaned gently on his back, pushed the young man on the alley wall with ingenuity, and opened his fingers with his left hand. A dull crash came from the palm of his hand. It turned out that someone used a stone as a concealed weapon to hit the side of the head of the young man in royal clothes. The momentum is amazing, and the strength is almost enough to penetrate a wall. The old man smashed the stone the size of his fist, but instead of killing the assassin, he punched the girl in black with his right hand. The hanging knife girl hesitated a little and forcibly suppressed her instinct to pull out the scabbard. Instead, she tilted her head and just avoided the powerful punch. The fierce fighting style immediately disrupted the girl's veil and heart. The tall old man turned his straight fist into a sweep, and his fist hit the girl's head. The fist moved around and smooth without stagnation. The girl had to quickly raise her arms, fold the backs of her hands together and protect them outside her ears, showing a cross-defense posture and blocking in front of the boxing rod. At the next moment, the girl slipped out more than 10 steps. The girl gently vomited out a mouthful of turbid air, stretched out the hand whose blood penetrated the cotton cloth, and righted the slanting curtain hat on her head. She was a little angry. The girl turned around, looked at the tall old man, who looked around and said, "If it weren't for me, it would be a dead man." The old man turned a deaf ear. But compared with before, the old eunuch, who was experienced in assassination and sneak attack, had reduced the harm of girls to the second place, and the first place was given to the shooter on the other side of the alley. Of course, there are only two real outsiders in the alley except the master and servant. On the other side of the alley stood a tall, thin-masked man, but his arms are very strong, and his muscles are like iron balls. He hung two bags full of round objects around his waist. He stood where he was, as if to say that the previous sneak attack was just a reminder. When the cold sight passed over the girl, the man grinned, stuck out his tongue, and his eyes were hot. The girl smiled and said two words. "Come back." The voice just fell. I saw it over the head. The flying sword came to the girl and wheeled around her like a child. She didn't have a good way. "Get out." The flying sword flashed away. The master and servant were as dull as a chicken. The old eunuch was not shocked by the flying sword itself. It's a sincere fear that girls can control flying swords here at will. This feeling made the old man in a trance. It was like going back to his youth. When he first entered the palace, he was trembling. One day, he looked at the elder wearing a big red python suit and walking under the palace wall. Of course, it's not the eunuch who doesn't even know his name, but the dazzling scarlet. After regaining consciousness, the young man in royal clothes smiled, full of self-mockery, took a step forward, cared and asked, "Grandpa Wu, are you all right?" The white-haired old eunuch had a heavy face and shook his head and said, "It's better to be careful. It's really not possible. A family. The boy quickly waved his hand and asked, "Why don't we apologize?" The old man was a little unprepared, and then he was sad, angry, and remorseful. The Lord humiliated his ministers to death, especially the imperial family. But the young man in royal clothes had said with a smile, "Grandpa Wu, I did something wrong. It's not difficult to say I'm sorry." The old man still felt that this was inappropriate, and the young man in royal clothes had gone to the girl. In an instant, the old man had mixed feelings. It turned out that there was no mud on the boy's back.